Hello, everyone. Good evening. Well, welcome to First Thursdays. I wanted to start just by talking about major themes for Living for the City. And I started researching Living for the City at the end of the 1990s in Oakland. I was living in Oakland, and that really mattered. The kind of living history that I was absorbing in Oakland really shaped the kind of history that I wrote about the genesis of the Panthers. And more broadly, I was interested in the genesis of a new type of Black politics, of Black radicalism. So that includes the Panthers, but also a series of youth and student organizations that preceded the Panthers. And the question that I started my book with was, why Oakland? Why was the best-known tendency? There are other Black Panther parties that precede Oakland, but why did the best-known tendency come from Oakland, and what was it about the political culture, political economy, and the specificity of Oakland that produced this new type of politics? This picture that I wanted to say from the cover of my book is actually of the Lumpen. They were the Panthers house band, and they were a Sly and the Family Stone style band. This is an image from 1973 from a protest to try to get Black businesses to support the Panther programs, the survival programs. I chose it partially because it's an unfamiliar image of the party, and today I'm going to be talking about some unfamiliar elements of the party. Okay, what? You know, it wasn't working.
Yeah, it was not working on your computer. It needs to advance this protection. It's not for yours, it's only for the other one.
Oh, okay. I wanted to start, I call these images Black Power before and after. And a lot of my book was interested in the kind of transformation of Black youth and their self-concept. Eldridge Cleaver described it as revolution in our lifetime. And so I wanted to show some pictures of Oakland in 1950 and then show a picture of Oakland in 1968. And the task of my book in many ways is to explain how we get from this image in 1955 to the subsequent images that I'll be showing in 1968. This image is from DeFremery Park, which was a park right in the center of West Oakland, and it was really kind of the public culture center of the Black community of West Oakland. This is an image from a state-sponsored recreation program in DeFremery Park that was really kind of the vision that older people and an older generation of Black residents had of what young people should be like, cotillion dresses and tea parties. This is the same park in 1968. 1955, 1968. And I feel like you can tell this story in images. I love to use images because I really think this is a story of Black power before and after. Same thing, fraternal organization, 1955, DeFremery Park. DeFremery Park, 1968, Panther Guards. So the task that I had was to try to explain the genesis of something new and a vision of young people that is defined by young people, the politics and the aesthetics and how they expressed it and how the history shaped that. So some of the major themes of my research on the Panthers, I call it a tale of origins, familiar and unfamiliar. And what I mean by that is that the Panther Party always had this strange quality, at least for the post-Panther generations, those of us that came of age in the 1980s and subsequent generations, of feeling as if the history had already been told. In fact, we were always being told that. We already know that story. But living in Oakland, I had a sense of the history of Oakland that wasn't known. So while this was thought of as a familiar history, the formation of the party in 1966, police patrols, black beret, black leather jackets, and powder blue shirts, there were also many elements that were unfamiliar. So the Panthers were understood to be the quintessential northern urban Black power movement. But living in Oakland, I saw that Oakland is a very southern city. Everyone is from the South, and the culture is very Southern. So while it had been counterposed as the Black Panther Party, urban, northern, and militant, versus a Southern, nonviolent movement of civil disobedience, what I saw in Oakland is that everyone was Southern, and the roots of the Panthers were deeply Southern. And I got interested in thinking about that larger Southern diaspora and what the relationship was between the South and the North, and also the unknown traditions in the South, armed self-defense, militant resistance, and that what if the actual origins of Black radicalism of the kind that we see in the North and in California really had its wellsprings in the South itself. So the first kind of issue that I saw is that the core social base, and this is true not only of the leadership, but also the rank and file in Oakland, that they were born in the South and that they came of age in California cities. And this is really a story of people's having a foot in two different worlds. Many of them not only come from the South, but also from the rural South. So it's also a story of rural-urban migration, people coming from rural areas, moving to cities, and then ultimately moving to California. And I argue that this understanding that social base of the party is really important. The second thing was that in researching the Panthers, even though we have some archival sources that have been housed in different university libraries and public libraries, I saw that a lot of the prehistory of the party was not in the archive. So it became apparent to me immediately that I need to start interviewing people and really creating an oral archive. And that's something that we might talk about in question and answer period, the oral archive. We still need people to go out and interview and tell the story of the Panthers. This is not a story we know. It's really not. We think we know because we've seen it in media. But media representations, I found, are very different than the real social truth and social base of the party. So I set out immediately in interviewing people, and not only interviewing Panthers, and certainly the rank and file, but also the organizations that preceded the Panthers. And I found something that surprised me at the time, which is that many of the young people who participated in the Panthers and their predecessors and West Coast Revolutionary Action Movement in the study groups that I'll be talking about in a minute, that many of these young people had spent time in California Youth Authority, California juvenile prisons. So 30 years before mass incarceration, before what we think of as the emergence of the new Jim Crow, much of what greeted migrants from the South in California and other northern cities were jails and criminalization. And that engagement with the punitive state, with state punishment, started as children, not only as teenagers and as young adults. So that engagement with state violence really extended back into early childhood. And the kind of organizing against domestic and international violence really grew out of that experience as children. So my book is going to trace that story. And I think it's today, for us thinking about how this relates to research and activism, the Panthers in many different ways tell us a story about how young people responded to state violence and created something new. So that's something that we might also talk about. The third piece of the party's history was another one that I found through doing interviews that surprised me, which is that all roads seem to lead back to Merritt College, which was a community college on the edge between South Berkeley and North Oakland, and that many of the Panthers had attended classes there. Huey Newton actually teaches there in the early 1970s, and that to sum it up in a sentence, the Panthers, it's a little known fact that the Panthers started with a study group. That it was a study group that really led to the genesis of the party in Oakland, that black youth are meeting in the early 60s and they're drawing readings from the past in order to interpret their experience in California cities. So this is a story of black youth, poor, working class migrant youth at a time when public education is free. There's no tuition in California until the 1970s under Jerry Brown, this neoliberal shift, that people whose parents, many of whom had 5 or 6 years of education for the first time with a GED or high school diploma, are able to attend community colleges. And that the real genesis of the radical movement in California, a lot of it had its roots on campuses in this context. I might add that in thinking about how we frame this, compare it to today, much of what we're watching today is a real attack on public education. But in the 1960s, one of the complicated things is that the Cold War meant that higher education and schools in general, compared to today, were very well funded. So they are battlegrounds, and a lot of the youth in the Panthers are involved in battlegrounds over the content of schools, how they're being treated, over dealing with institutional racism and violence against children. Okay, so the Cold War education was an important part of this story. This is simply to show you the transformation of Oakland. The larger demographic story behind the Panthers and the Black Power movement is that Oakland is 2% black in 1940. By 1950, it's 10%, and by 1981, it's over 50%. So there's a real transformation of the city and the development of a black majority. And out of that black majority, we're going to see a black radical movement. This is an image of Merritt College that I spoke about. I would call this the true home of the Panthers, home to the study groups, home to where Huey Newton and Bobby Seale first meet, home to Revolutionary Action Movement, home to a very kind of vibrant movement of Black youth. And one of the things is thinking about the history of CUNY and the community colleges in New York and in other cities across the country. That history has not been written yet. Historians are writing about Black studies, but in my book, Black studies is actually the borning movement that helps to produce the Black Power movement. Not just that Black studies is a result of the Black Power movement, but what initially brings youth together are actually forming study groups and talking about the past in relationship to the present. This is a quick overview of the periodization of the party. I don't have time to talk about it. Emory Douglas, Art for People's Sake. One of the reasons that the Panthers were able to have such a strong influence is that they produce a newspaper with original art, with incredible reporting. And the vision both of art and I would call it political education was really key to the party. They were pioneers in creating new forms of media. So both looking at the legacy of Emory Douglas, who I would call one of the most important, if not the most important intellectual of the party as a visual artist, but the idea of creating art and creating aesthetic forms that would engage people and figure out how to mobilize them. And I think this is one of the Panthers' most important legacies, and more needs to be talked about, the kind of cultural power of the Panthers and why they remain so resonant for subsequent generations. There's a reason why the media is drawn to the Panthers, and that had a lot to do with how they used art and how they used aesthetics. Women were incredibly important in the party. I think some other speakers tonight will talk about that in more detail, but one of the big transformations of the party is the shift towards survival programs in 1968, 1969, and a lot of that turn had to do with the increasing influence of women in the party. A surprise that I also found from doing research is that many of the breakfast programs and the different survival programs of the party were located in local Black churches. So as this new infrastructure is set up called Survival Pending Revolution, young people drew on an older tradition of mutual aid created by the first generation of migrants, and that there really was this intersection between the politics of the church and the Panthers. So while the Panthers are thought of as a left secular movement, and certainly they were able to forge ties in the Black church, and in much of the North, it's churches that actually provided the infrastructure for the Panther survival programs. The freedom schools, an important point I wanted to make about that, I think that the history of the Panther School is not talked about enough. The longest running institution of the Oakland Black Panther Party was the Huey P. Newton Intercommunal Institute. It was largely staffed and run by women, and it was the longest sustained effort of the party. In many ways, the first 2 years of the party, of armed self-defense, of Panther patrols, overshadowed the history of what the Panthers did afterwards. And I argue in Living for the City that maybe the most important legacy of the Panthers was political education, and that's defined in all different ways, through the school that they ran, which was a progressive school, K through 8, open to all children, public school, to using the newspaper as a form of political education. So education was crucial to the party. In my book, I have 4 original maps that interface with oral history to try to map locations that no longer exist. An important point about the Panthers' turn towards survival programs, it's when they turn to schools and breakfast programs that they face the worst repression from the state. So J. Edgar Hoover's famous quote about the Black Panther Party as the single greatest threat to the internal security of the United States is actually said precisely at the moment that the Panthers are setting up self-sustaining institutions, breakfast programs, and schools. In many ways, the system they set up is an alternative to the punitive social welfare system of the state. The Panthers ran an electoral campaign in 1973, and they did something remarkable. And I thought about this a lot in the elections of 2008, which is that they were able to register between 20 and 50,000 people to vote. And they did this with no funding. They did it largely with volunteers, many of them from community colleges. And they did this by creating their own media and creating innovative forms of organizing, including driving through local neighborhoods and stump speaking on the bus. So they were really pioneers in new ways to mobilize. Many people argue that the election of the first Black mayor in 1977 was a product of the Panthers' voter registration efforts. The legacy of electoral politics is a complicated one, and I think that many of us are asking these questions today and thinking about the Obama administration and what that relationship is between the Black Power movement, Black radical movements, and electoral politics. But it is in the moment of turning towards electoral politics that you see increasing authoritarianism within the party that ultimately damages and alienates the rank and file. So while there's a great accomplishment in running this campaign, it's an unsuccessful campaign for mayor, but they're able to force a runoff election and win between 35 and 40% of the vote. This was an accomplishment, but it also had a cost that helped to damage the party itself. Okay, well, I'm going to conclude just by talking about sort of the end of the Panther Party. The party is disbanded in 1981. The school is shut down in 1982. As I talked about, the dynamic with electoral politics, I think, is crucial to this. One thing I know, we have a number of New York Panthers in the audience and Panthers from different parts of the country. One thing I'm hoping we can talk about is how different chapters of the party, how they had different timelines and how they were things they shared and they had in common with the Oakland Black Panther Party and how they were different. One historian has called it a Congress of Local Movements, which means that it integrated the different efforts from Black communities all over the country, but it also reflected in its character what the specific struggles and kind of geography of those communities were. So the Oakland story is not the story. It is a story of the genesis of something new, but it is situated within a history of many different cities that really need research. Thank you.
Okay, we're about to do part 2 of Oakland, which will be Robyn Spencer. While Robyn's coming up. Now, you know, this is the first of a series, and we can't cover the whole Black Power movement well, probably even in the next decade, right? But we are going to do different dimensions. This videotaping is kind of important because we want to return this history to the community that made this history. But so we're going to do the economic dimension and, you know, so on and so forth as we go on. But without further ado, we have Robyn Spencer.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm really excited to see everyone here. You're exactly the audience I imagined for this kind of conversation, so it's really exciting. I have to shout out my 2 students here from Lehman College. So the Bronx is in the house. I know Brooklyn, Harlem, other places, and many spaces are here as well. I've been working on the organizational history of the Black Panther Party in Oakland for some time now. I guess I can say that my scholarly stakes are kind of cast with understanding the modern Black freedom movement. And as part of that movement, I've been especially drawn to those who define themselves as radicals, flamboyantly, defiantly, and who unapologetically sought fundamental structural change in the United States. And that, of course, led me to the movement to Black Power, and that, of course, led me to this podium. So despite the fact that this framing sort of positions me as an academic expert, I want to out myself as also a student of this era. I believe that Black Power has a lot to teach anyone interested in social justice today. I'm outing myself as a soldier in the ground war to teach Black Power from the bottom up, to aid and abet its incorporation into formal and informal educational spaces such as this. Also as a fellow traveler in the journey to understand the American Revolution known as Black Power. I want to thank the organizers, the staff at the Schomburg for having the vision for allowing this kind of very radical and untraditional conversation that I think really needs to happen. I mean, I think the times demand a speaker series like this. The times demand us to really look to our past to try to understand our present and chart our future. So I wanted to share 4 beliefs that I have about sort of the academic and activist imperative of Black freedom studies, and then 4 ways in which I've tried to contribute to these sort of conversations. So you'll get a list of 4 at the end of my talk. Well, 1, I believe we've only begun to scratch the surface of understanding what Black Power was really about, what it really meant, what the potential was, what the limitations were, what the legacies are in terms of public policy, cultural traditions, and social reproduction, what it meant to live day to day as a member of a Black Power organization. Our imagination has not caught up with the source space, and the source space has not unleashed our imagination. On the one hand, scholars were limited by what we can find, what people are willing to tell us, and what documentary evidence that's out there. We're also limited on what we're willing to ask, able to see, willing to imagine. Sexuality and all of its manifestations, international context, class, regional variation, economic basis, incarceration, music and performance. There's so many ways in which we can try to understand the revolution known as Black Power. And this is not a critique of all of the fantastic work that's come out on the Black Power movement over the past 2 decades. This is to really claim that Black Power deserves the kind of sustained analysis that any social movement, any president, any war claims. No one ever says, why another book on Lincoln? We should never say, why another book on the Black Power movement? I claim the space for that. I demand a mental shift that allows for that importance. This whole room could be filled by people studying the Black Power movement. There's more than enough room on the table. The story is complex and it's ever changing. Even though, as I tell my students, nothing new is going to happen, right? It's over. The past is past. But the newness comes from the interpretations and what we find. My work takes on a small part of this by looking at political repression. The Black Panther Party was a victim of COINTELPRO and surveillance by the FBI from local police forces. The depth of state political repression really had an impact on all aspects of the operation of the Black Panther Party. The revelations of the past few years alone that hallowed figures, foundational people such as Oakland Panther supporter Richard Aoki are now revealed to have FBI connections. Well, this has shifted everything. It's revealed that we still don't have the analytical upper hand on exactly how political repression operated as part of the movement's foundations. It didn't just derail and destroy, it built, it molded. It was like a cancer with all of the connotations of invasion, mutation, latency, and incurability that comes along with how we think about cancer. So repression, surveillance, harassment was a constant in the Panthers' history in Oakland from start to end. And my work looks at how rank-and-file members experienced repression, how infiltrations shaped the course of the movement, how internal tensions were fueled and channeled through political repression. So number 2, I believe that knowledge of Black Power has the potential to shape the self-conception of ourselves as a people. I believe that Black people's cultural and psychic toolkit of survival is incomplete without a more sustained knowledge about the movement for Black Power. At the same time, I believe that Black Power is not just for Black people, then or now. I believe that America will not truly know what it is without a full reckoning about what Black Power was about. Black Power was born out of the savagery of Jim Crow. It was born out of the ideological legacy of Black nonconformists, the nationalists, the feminists, the anti-capitalists. It was born out of the possibility and influence of global revolution. It was internationalist, but it was not foreign. It was homegrown resistance, Yankee Doodle Dandy socialism, in the words of Eldridge Cleaver. It was inspired by the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. It tried to hold America accountable for what it promised and dared to suggest those promises were not enough. One small example, the Black Panther Party held a Revolutionary People's Constitutional Convention. In 1970, they gathered between 10 and 15,000 people in Philadelphia to rewrite the American Constitution. Everyone was there. Gay and lesbian liberation forces, women's liberation, third world politics, anti-capitalists, Native Americans, Chicanos, radical whites. This is just one example. This is not to say that sexism, racial chauvinism, etc. didn't lurk in the heart and define the structures of Black Power organizations, but the extent to which alternatives were posed by people who were denied basic human rights is astounding. What would America look like if Black Power was its mirror? My work addresses this by focusing on the dual revolution the Panthers sought to wage. On the one hand, they sought structural change through engagement in formal politics. On the other hand, they sought individual transformation and attempted to create and define community as part and parcel of social change. They waged a battle on the level of personal politics. They didn't just want to make a revolution, they wanted to be a revolution. This notion shifts the focus to the day-to-day realities of rank-and-file members, those who occupy oftentimes the most democratic layer of the organization. For many of those members, the attempts to shed individualism, confront ingrained ideals about gender and sexuality, build genuine bonds of mutual trust and respect with comrades, and provide social services to both comrades and communities in need was one of the most politicizing things about being a member of the Black Panther Party. Being a Panther member was not just a commitment to a political ideal, an organization, and a community, it was a commitment to other comrades. I think this opens up the study of the Panthers in many interesting ways. We can see struggles over collective living, over housework, over parenting, over who's going to control my Sundays, as really central parts of what the Black Power movement was about. This idea of a movement within a movement, I think, speaks to battles whose outcomes are important today. Today, one could easily argue that unaddressed internal contradictions continue to hamper many movements for social justice. So number 3, I believe there's a major disinformation campaign around the question of Black power waged by friends and foe alike. No, I'm not an apologist for angry Black people. I'm studying revolution. No, I'm not an advocate for angry Black people. I'm studying revolution. One finds oneself saying this to movement haters and movement lovers alike. It's only relatively recently that Black power scholars have been freed from disclaimers, comparisons, and defensive postures that almost defined how we talked about Black power from its inception. When I started writing about the Black Panther Party, I was told I wouldn't get a job. This was at a time when white scholars writing on the Ku Klux Klan seemed to be a cottage industry. I couldn't understand how writing about white terrorism was scholarly and writing on Black revolution was not. Anyway, I didn't listen, and I, in fact, did get a job. I don't know if this is unrelatable to today's graduate students who are facing more established archives, a rich and budding historiography, and relatively more openness in journals and conferences. However, I would still say it's true that in today's academy, we face power structures that are bent on delegitimatizing and marginalizing radical protests from below. And we face students who come into our classrooms who are both deeply inspired by Black power, deeply ignorant of what the movement involved, and deeply committed to the understanding that the movement they so admire was lesser than the movement that preceded it, less noble, less good, less universal, less important. This is the conundrum of Black power scholarship. This is the potential of Black power scholarship. My work addresses this by focusing on the Panthers as a political vehicle, and I'm choosing my words carefully. Think about a car. Right? The Black Panther Party was a political vehicle. People sought to build an organization with structures in place to allow it to withstand and thrive. Some of this was purposeful and thought out, but other parts were not. Organizational history is a political imperative. We need organizations. We need to know how organizations in the past operated so we can build organizations today. The Panthers' ideology, their choices about leadership structure, their failure to provide accountability between the rank and file and the leadership, their attempts to foist an Oakland-centered leadership structure on what was increasingly looking like a series of local movements is instructive. And number 4, I believe there's legacies and lessons relevant for us today in Black power. We are living in the future they imagined, yet it's so different from the future that they hoped for. It's instructive to study what Black power activists imagined, the hurdles they crossed, the roadblocks they could not surmount. I believe that some of the same economic, social, and political challenges of the 1960s are with us today in different guise. Deindustrialization, state violence, cultural imperialism. We've probably all seen the Harlem Shake videos. I don't have to say anything else. So in 2013, we still want and need land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, and peace. These are lines from the 10-point platform and program. Scholars today are seeking the soul of the Black Power movement in the context of a Black presidential administration, a drone war, deepening poverty, unemployment, detention of immigrants, and a criminal justice infrastructure that is an engine of destruction in Black and brown communities. January was the 4-year anniversary of the murder of Oscar Grant, the young man killed on the BART platform by the police in Oakland. February was the 1-year anniversary of the murder of Trayvon Martin in Florida, Ramarley Graham in the Bronx. I remember being a graduate student in 1991 and watching LA explode after the exoneration of police officers in the brutal beating of Rodney King. I remember the names of the 1980s, Yusef Hawkins, Eleanor Bumpers, and from the 1990s, Abner Louima and Amadou Diallo. Historians believe deeply in change over time, and I do believe in that. But the long list of names that stretch between the police brutality and violence that shaped the emergence of the Panthers in the 1960s and the next young person to die at the hands of state violence, whose name we do not yet know, but whose story we already know, remind me to heed to the continuities. The study of Black power doesn't just fill holes in the scholarly literature, it fills holes in the tapestry of the American past, and these are sometimes literally bullet holes. My work addresses this by focusing on how the Panthers tried to address police violence, first through a commitment to armed self-defense embodied in their initial actions monitoring the Oakland police. There was a lot of hostility between many communities and police at that time. Hugh Newton and Bobby Seale adopted the ideal of armed patrols of the Oakland police. This was done on a very visceral and human level. One incident at a time, they refashioned the fear, intimidation, and anger of the daily indignities that people faced at the hands of the Oakland police force, and they turned that into empowerment, education, and street theater. When the state retaliated by changing the laws, they adopted other tactics. They launched ideological warfare, they sought community-based and public policy solutions, they issued political statements about police brutalities, and they sought many occasions to connect the daily reality of police brutality for ordinary African Americans to the heightened realities of people who were involved in political activism. In 1969, the Panthers held a revolutionary conference for a united front against fascism. They invited over 1,000 organizations, and the objective was to build national solidarity around community control of the police on a national scale, freedom of all political prisoners and political freedom, a political program for all the poor, Black, and oppressed workers and peoples of America, the military off our campuses, and self-defense. These demands don't sound very dated, do they? In the world of 1970s politics in Oakland and Berkeley, they pressed for community control of the police and reform of police department in ways that have been obscured but are relevant for us today. So I study Black power because I believe it was a rational response to the crises and opportunities in working class Black America in the 1960s and 70s. Black power was irreverent, it was bold, it was in your face, and it was sometimes brash. But it was as much substance as style. It was as much rigor as revolutionary romance. It was strategic, it was analytical, it was optimistic, it was visionary, it was organized. It faced an almost unprecedented attack from the state. The fact that this has to be asserted is more of a sign of our times than a sign of their times. So I'll be happy to talk more in the Q&A, and thanks for your attention.
Well, what you're saying is three of the best kept secrets in the scholarly world. Our panelists here, and there's going to be more to come. Now we're going to have a discussion of Chicago from Jakobi Williams. Thank you.
Trying to get this thing working over here. Greetings, everyone. Born and raised in the South Side of Chicago, but I'm a professor at the University of Kentucky, and man, I've been longing for an audience like this. I just can't, I couldn't pay people to fill the seats in Kentucky, so I'm happy to see you all. What I hope to do once we get the PowerPoint up here is share with you, sorry? Computer. It's on the computer. Oh, here? Never mind. It's all on me. All right. What I hope to do is share with you a history of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party. I don't have time to give you a complete overdraft of the book, so I'm going to pull out maybe what I believe to be maybe two critical key aspects of the book. And from there, well, before I begin, I want to share some information about the sources that I use. Most of the material from this book comes from interviews with the Illinois chapter, and then after taking about 6 to 8 years to get these comrades to trust me, now I understand why there hasn't been a book written on the Illinois chapter of the party. And conducting these interviews, a lot of those comrades thought I was a FBI agent because I just knew too much information to be as young as I am. So it took me years to convince these folks to trust me, even though I am from the South Side of Chicago. But also a great deal of the sources that I use come from the SEAL secret police records from Chicago Police Department known as the Red Squad. Almost every major city had a Red Squad. It came out of HUAC, the House Un-American Activities Committee. But the way in which Chicago used these secret police force, this Red Squad, the Daley administration used it against any group who had any dissent against this administration. So not just so-called subversive, i.e. the party, is in its identification from their point of view, but even folks like the Boy Scouts, nuns, book clubs, Jewish League of Women Voters, any of these folks had any dissent against the Daley administration, this Red Squad was used to dismantle, destroy, and then eventually, as Fred Hampton as an example, assassinate these people for their political beliefs. And so in 1983, these records were sealed by a court order, a circuit court judge, to prevent the city of Chicago from hemorrhaging millions and millions of dollars. Almost $500 million in lawsuits in 1983 alone were filed by folks who, for the violation of constitutional rights and the violation of the civil rights. So these records were sealed by a court order. So it took me years, over 7 years, to get access to these records. I'm one of maybe a handful of scholars who has unlimited, unprecedented access to these records. So much of what I'm going to share with you today come from those files. I begin here with a quote from the Young Patriots. I don't read this quote. I'll leave it here for you to read on your own. But it pretty much sets the tone for the 2 points that I want to highlight today, dealing with the Illinois chapter of the party, some of the most, probably, I argue, unknown aspects of this organization. And this group, the Young Patriots, are a group of Appalachian white migrants, Confederate flag-wearing white boys from the Appalachian Mountains of eastern Kentucky, West Virginia, North Carolina, and those folks, these Southerners who, like African-American Southerners who have migrated north, as many of the members of the Illinois chapter have been these Southern migrants themselves. These Appalachian whites are also Southern poor migrants moving to the city of Chicago, and they will form what we call the original Rainbow Coalition. So much of what I share with you today will be a history of this original group, this original Rainbow Coalition, led by, founded by, incorporated by the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party, in spirit of the kind of racial coalition politics that was the essence underpinning of the national organization, and to give you a local history to demonstrate that what's true of the macrocosm is not always true of the microcosm. We have all these great personalities and icons and histories of Oakland that tend to overshadow all the local chapters. So my work is in concert with a burgeoning list of scholars who are beginning to look at the Black Panther Party at these local levels, to give those histories, not in juxtaposition to Oakland, but to give a history of those local struggles, those local histories, to give those those local chapters their history as well, so they're not overshadowed by the national arena in Oakland. So this is much of what my purpose here today. I'm going to skip some of these interviews. There was 49 different chapters of the Black Panther Party, and Chicago is probably one of the largest, at least I argue, the largest, most consistent chapter outside of Oakland, consistent with the tenets of the Oakland chapter, the national headquarters. So I'm going to skip some of these images. Much of these images that I showed to you today are never before seen photos I've collected from various sources, or I should say liberated from various sources for a number of reasons. And so I'm very hesitant to be videotaped here, but I'm going to share them with you anyway, because I've liberated these sources from a number of places. So here you have a photo of the Illinois chapter's office. The Illinois chapter is founded in 1968, November 4th, 1968, in Chicago. It becomes the Illinois chapter of the party because the party sets up chapters, branches, I should say, within the state of Illinois, and then it also oversaw chapters in other states, such as the Milwaukee chapter in Omaha and St. Louis and others. It becomes national headquarters east, so to speak, dealing with those various branches. So it becomes a very important chapter. And Fred Hampton becomes one of the most charismatic, critical leaders of that party. So what's happening in Chicago during this period, I'll give you a quick overview of the kind of activism that's taking place. You have this student movement taking place, these youth organizing all these various forms against housing, the desegregation of schools. You have SDS and this student movement taking place. You have anti-war. You have all these elements, these activists, and these folks are involved in this group as high school students. Fred Hampton is the president of the NAACP Youth Council. Bobby Rush, another founder, is a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. So these folks are activists in their own right, students in their own right, student activists. And then the Chicago Freedom Movement, Martin Luther King brings the movement, the civil rights movement north. These activists who are already involved in those kind of campaigns began to conduct those kind of organizing works with Martin Luther King and that Chicago Freedom Movement. Then that movement fails, and so it doesn't end. They continue the work that they were doing before King came to Chicago, and they continue this work. So it's very much a youth-driven movement, and much of the civil rights campaigns of the civil rights movement that the Chicago Freedom Movement were advocating for is continued within the confines of the Black Panther Party. So you see some remnants of those civil rights activities within this revolutionary organization. The Free Breakfast Program is one of those major issues where I talk about in the detail in a few seconds. So this is Bob Lee. Bob Lee, again, like these Southern migrants, Bob Lee migrates from Houston, Texas as a VISTA volunteer. And he situates himself on the north side of Chicago in the YMCA, and he organizes poor people, primarily these Appalachian whites and these other white ethnics, and these Puerto Ricans who primarily who primarily reside on the north side of Chicago. So Chicago then and still is the most racially, residentially segregated city in America. So you have these enclaves that even in these 5 already? Good Lord, I just got up here. All right, let me run through these real quick. All right, so Bob Lee, maybe we can talk about this more in question and answer. Bob Lee helps found this idea of starting this Rainbow Coalition. He shares this idea with Fred Hampton. Fred Hampton becomes the spokesperson of this organization. He sits for interviews. He goes around advocating for the city of Chicago to incorporate these entities into the organization. But Bob Lee is really the mover and shaker of this group. So what happens is you get these particular organizations, the original organizations of the original Rainbow Coalition, led by the Illinois chapter of the party, the Young Patriots, these Appalachian white migrants from the Appalachian migrants, the Young Lords, migrants from Puerto Rico. Many of them are moving from not just the island of Puerto Rico, but from New York, and moved to Chicago, and these white ethnic groups called Rise Up Angry. So I'm going to run through these photos real quick because I want to show you one clip before I'm snatched off the stage. So here you have Chuck Geary, who also is a Southern migrant from Kentucky. He creates these buttons, and he passes them out at this Van Screener's documentary called American Revolution 2. And these are buttons from the Nixon-Agnew campaign that have been thrown out, and he repaints them in the colors for, red for indigenous folks, white for working class hillbillies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And at that Van Screening, with these organizations there, the Young Patriots, the Young Lords, Rise Up Angry, and the Panthers, Fred Hampton takes his button, he dubs his group the Rainbow Coalition, thus coining the term Rainbow Coalition. So they began to go out and advocate to the city of Chicago, primarily the daily Democratic machine that they're now united as one force, and the spirit of the party is a force for class struggle, class solidarity that transcends race. So 1 year to the day after the assassination of Martin Luther King, they held this press conference to announce to the world their unity. So you have the Puerto Rican Young Lords here, you have now U.S. Congressman Bobby Rush and the Panthers, these white ethnics here in the middle, Rise Up Angry, and the Confederate flag wearing white boys from the Appalachians, the Young Patriots. You're now sitting to the city of Chicago. They're now one united force. They're not going to allow urban renewal, gentrification, poverty, and all these critical issues to divide them in any shape, way, shape, or form. This photo is actually from the United Conference Against Fascism in Oakland. And so you have Bobby Rush is the first person to bring this group in. The Appalachian Whites are the first organization to join with the party. And if I can show a quick clip real quick about some of the activism that he's doing to bring that party in. And once he joins, Bob Lee, and once he joins, once he gets this organization to fall, to join this Rainbow Coalition, all the rest fall like dominoes. And you get this mass movement that leads to, I argue, the first black mayor of Chicago, and later, the first black president of the United States.
Once you realize, man, that your house is funky with rats and roaches, same way a black dude's house is, once you realize that your brother's been brutalized by the cops, the same way the west side and south side is, once you realize, man, that you're getting inadequate, man, education in these high schools and junior high schools over here, the same way the south side and the west side, once you realize that you are paying taxes for the cops to whoop your ass, you're paying them. You're paying them, man, for to whoop your ass. You're paying them to come in to beat your children. You're paying them to run you off the corners.
To transcend these ideas of race and unite under class solidarity. And Fred Hampton repeat this over and over. You don't fight racism, you fight racism, solidarity. This is the Panther slogan. And so these Appalachian whites, what makes it so revolutionary, it's the most racially residential segregated city in America, and he convinced these white supremacists, essentially, to take leadership of them. So as I read these files, these sealed secret police records, these police officers are talking about cutting the head off the snake. So talking about getting rid of Fred Hampton. They argue that he's more revolutionary and more of a threat than Martin Luther King ever can be, quote, because not even King could get these white boys, these Confederate flag white boys to follow him. So he's revolutionary in that sense. So he brings all these groups together, Cha-Cha, Jimenez, and the Young Lords. I'm going to go through these real quick. Rise Up Angry, Barbara Sankum, squeeze some of these in. This is their free breakfast program. And the reason these groups join forces with them is because the party has programs. These programs, again as Professor Murch highlighted earlier, tend to be overshadowed by these other aspects, more popular aspects of the party, this armed struggle to self-defense. But these programs is what bring these groups in. So they set up their breakfast programs, and then they set up these breakfast programs, these clinics. Every single program the party had, they set them up for these other groups as well. So this is Rise Up Angry's free breakfast program. This is Rise Up Angry's free clinic, set up by the Panthers, modeled after the Panthers, and then the Panthers leave so they can run this on their own. This is the Young Patriots, these Appalachian Whites, their free breakfast program. This is their free clinic. You can see they're no longer wearing Confederate flags, but they're wearing Black Panther Party buttons. This is their free clinics. This is more of their free clinics, and then this is rallies and rallies and rallies. I'm going to skip through some of these. This is the way in which the party spread this message throughout the city. Fred Hampton would go and give these speeches to recruit college students to join forces with this revolution of racial coalitions politics. But he wouldn't bring the Panthers with him. He'd bring these Puerto Rican brothers, right? These young lords, to demonstrate this idea of racial unity. Bobby Rush would do the same thing, and they're posing these photos throughout the city of Chicago on these various papers trying to bring these folks to bear. And eventually you have all these various campaigns. So whenever those issues come to bear as a joint effort, whatever your issue is, you take the leadership, and we're all a joint forces. So this is a Young Lords rally led by Cha-Cha Jimenez, but all those groups are there. This is a Young Patriots rally led by these poor Appalachian white migrants. And I'm sorry to go through these so fast, but I want to get this out. But you can't see the Panthers and the rest of those groups, but they all are there in solidarity. They show up at these rallies giving these speeches. Fred Hampton is the speaker, talking about bringing this kind of class solidarity together, and his bodyguards are these Confederate flag wearing white boys doing security. So this is revolutionary in the way in which it operates in the city of Chicago. And so as a result, he's eventually assassinated. And so as the FBI gets a lot of credit for this, but as reading these sealed secret police records, I discovered that it's really the Daley administration that's forcing the hand of the FBI to go in and cut off this so-called head of the snake, because he's using these folks to create this class solidarity against the Daley administration. And so what happens is Fred Hampton's assassinated, and instead of killing the movement, they galvanize the movement, because these are activists that's on the fringe of the politics. They're not in the center of the political arena. And so what happens is they began to organize with politicians. Politicians began to jump ship from the Daley machine, and others, independents, and work with these activists because they're already organized in their communities, and they vote hand in hand Daley's successor out of office. And I move on. The first political successful candidate, because I'm running out of time, so I go real quick, is Harold Washington. There's a Democrat. He runs for mayor of Chicago on a Rainbow Coalition ticket. All these same groups I mentioned organized his campaign, get out the vote for his campaign, helped him run his campaign, and when he's elected, he created what he called his Rainbow Cabinet, his Rainbow Council, and he put these people in office with him. When he was elected, someone who had nothing, not a damn thing to do with the damn Rainbow Coalition, decided that this was a good political tool for winning elections, so he takes the Rainbow Coalition mantra and he trademarks it. He incorporates it. So now if you say Rainbow Coalition, you have to pay Jesse Jackson. So he steals this title from the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party, and he runs for president in 84 and 88. The same year he does that, in 83, this person moves to Chicago to become a community organizer. So the roots began to take form of this kind of trajectory of coalition politics in the city of Chicago. Obama doesn't effectively become this so-called racial coalition political icon until he loses the only election he's ever lost to original Black Panther founder, original Rainbow Coalition founder Bobby Rush. And for all these political reasons I don't have time to explain, but once he loses, he hires this man to be his campaign manager, who cut his teeth as a member of the Harold Washington administration, along with former SDS folks like Marilyn Katz and others who understood this kind of coalition politics. He has built a $1 million career out of using this Panther ideology and politics as a commodity to win elections for for individuals in this unprecedented way. And so I use all this to make this connection, hence from the bullet to the ballot, to demonstrate that we talk about the party in these revolutionary ways, but this organization, at least on the local level, Chicago, revolutionized the political arena in a number of ways. And you have to give Fred Hampton and Bob Lee and these Appalachian whites and these Puerto Ricans and these white ethnics this credit that no one gives them credit for. And so there's a trajectory of racial coalition politics from Fred Hampton to Barack Obama that you can draw a direct line, not one of genealogy, but one of appropriation, right? So the only one that's actually married to the politics is Harold Washington. But Jesse Jackson, Barack Obama, and David Axelrod appropriate the politics as an effective tool for winning elections. So that's pretty much a nutshell of what I wanted to highlight in this quick bullet point that I didn't get to really put out in this good class as much. Let me get out of the way here. Sorry to speed through that, but.
So you can see why we brought these people to talk to you. Can we?